So I'm Mary McIntyre, I'm an artist based in Belfast, and I use photography and installation in my art practice. I'm course director of a MFA in Fine Art at Belfast School of Art at Ulster University, and I run an electronic record label called Ton Recordings. Well, my photographic practice is ongoing, so I have a tendency to continue to take photographs irrespective of whether or not I actually have an exhibition coming up. So I don't make work specifically for an exhibition in relation to my photography, but I don't actually start to produce the photographs for exhibition until I have a particular venue that I'm working towards. And then I will work with the curator to select a series of photographs and then build the exhibition around the photographs. I suppose that I would say I'm not a photographer with a capital P. Photography is something that I use, but I don't think of myself as a photographer, even though I've been taking photographs in my practice for the last 30 years, and even though it's a very important element of my practice, a key element of my practice, the installations are also equally important to me. And I've never ever thought of photography as being purely a flat image. I've always been very interested in the idea that a photograph has an object quality. I'm also very interested in the idea of the things that are in the photograph having a very particular quality to them in terms of texture and colour, and I'm very interested in sort of almost representing that photographic environment in a more physical way in the gallery space. So I'll take key elements from the photographs, whether it is colour or texture, for example, and I'll kind of draw those out and recreate those in a physical sense through the installation, whether it's to do with flooring. Sometimes I've used installation to recreate the floor that's in the photograph out in the gallery space itself. So the viewer will be standing on a surface that completely mirrors the surface that they're looking at in the image. So there's almost like a spilling out of the photograph into the gallery space and a much more sensory experience as well as just a viewing experience. Well, my work on my record label has made me more and more engaged with musicians over this last 5 years that I've been running the label. The label specialises in minimal synth and cold wave, and I've come to be very interested in the idea of using audio and using sound as another element within this particular exhibition. And I began a collaboration with an artist called Sean McBride, who's an electronic artist based in New York, who goes by the name of Marshall Cantrell and is one of the foremost minimal synth artists, working with modular synths specifically. And we discussed the idea of interpretation and how interpretation is usually something that happens through discussion. And I was interested in the idea of one art form directly interpreting another art form. So we were collaborating based on the notion of him as a musician making compositions that are in response to the photographic images. So spending time with the photographic images and studying them, and then trying to compose a piece of music that actually reflects or responds to those images in some way. And that's exactly what's happened here, and that's what you'll hear in the gallery space at DCA. I think it's very important that the viewer will get to experience the work in silence and also with the audio as well. So each of the compositions will play every 15 minutes in the space. So there will be roughly 45 minutes of music followed by approximately 10 minutes of silence. And so during the space of a few hours, you would be able to hear all of the 8 compositions that related to the photographic series that Sean McBride responded to. I think that the title came about from thinking around the actual images themselves in terms of the spaces that they depict and how that relates also within the installations, because I think that my photography usually centres upon quite banal spaces. Certainly the spaces that you'll see in the exhibition are very run down and very dilapidated, and in some senses are quite ugly spaces in terms of what you find there within them. And I think that there's a sense of familiarity about them, because all the materials in the spaces, the carpet, the wall paint, the detritus, it's all very familiar to us. There isn't anything necessarily beautiful or special or grandiose about these spaces. They're very everyday spaces. They've obviously had an awful lot of use in their lifetime because they bear the marks and the traces of a lot of human activity, and they're very run down from that activity. But I don't think people would look at the photographs and necessarily be able to immediately pinpoint the type of space or the type of use that they had, because they're quite strange in terms of certain aspects of them. I don't think it would be so easy to kind of look at the images and say, oh, well, this must be a hospital, or this must be a municipal space, or I think it's quite difficult to pinpoint that. So places we think we know suggests a sense of familiarity, but actually, if we really start to think about it, we're not really sure where these spaces are. So that's a very direct reading in terms of the photographs. But I think in a more general sense, I think we can sometimes imagine that we're familiar with things, or we have a handle on things. But even our own environments and our own lives can sometimes become very unsettled due to life events or a whole range of different factors. And I think that places we think we know kind of talks about that sense of the familiar and the unfamiliar, and something being destabilised or unsettled, and a sense of mystery about the everyday as well, or an oddness in the everyday. And I think places we think we know kind of encapsulates that for me. So that's really how the title came about. On first viewing, the rooms appear to be empty. There isn't any furniture. It's devoid of the figure. So you have a tendency to just think of them as empty spaces. But that forces you, as you say, to notice small details that you perhaps wouldn't if you were actually in those spaces, or if you were just walking past an empty space. But those details become almost magnified and hugely important. Strangely enough, although my work is very strongly rooted in photography, I don't tend to look at a huge amount of photography or be influenced a great deal by other photography. For me, my influences come from literature, from cinema mostly, and from things that I'm reading, and also from music. So those would be the main influences. I think cinema particularly and literature are the main two influences for me. The text pieces that I have in the exhibition are extracts from Edgar Rice's Heimat, Die Zweite Heimat. So they're taken from those scripts that talk about costume, props, cinema, filmmaking. So they really, to me, tie together a lot of the themes that I'm interested in and thinking about in this exhibition, or when I was making the work. So I'm very, very interested in cinema, very interested in film, and that particular work by Edgar Rice is incredibly influential on me and on my work. So I wanted to represent those snippets from those conversations and pieces of dialogue from characters in that particular series in the space, because I think that those monologues and those dialogues talk about all of the ideas that I'm interested in to do with spectacle, to do with performance in the everyday. And so cinema is very strongly part of the exhibition, because the cinema here asked me to select a number of films, and one of the ones that I picked was David Lynch's Fire Walk With Me, which I think he made in about 1992, which was 2 years after Twin Peaks. And it was meant to be a prequel, but it came out after the series had finished. And there's a particular moment in that, well, there are a few moments in that film where in the bedroom of the main protagonist, Laura Palmer, there's a photograph or a picture on the wall of a very, very run-down, empty room in a house. And she, at one point, the camera kind of moves through into that photograph. She sometimes is pictured in the photograph as well. I think that space leads into the space that everybody knows in David Lynch's Twin Peaks, with the curtains and the checkered floor. And I think I saw that, you know, decades ago, but I think those two spaces, the huge expanse of curtains and also the corner room in the photograph in her bedroom, those are both in that exhibition. And I didn't realise it until I was having the conversation with the curator about that. And it's funny how these things can sometimes almost like stay with you subconsciously over years and kind of filter through into your work, but you're not really aware in a very conscious way that you're actually referencing them. But I enjoy referencing things very directly in my work. I don't have a problem with being very open about the things that have influenced me and how I will directly bring them into the work. So that, I think that particular moment in cinema has very strongly influenced this exhibition without me even realising. So cinema is hugely, hugely important in my work.